today, so that's what I'm doing. And I'll try to give more details about the Simple Grappa recipe I posted not that long ago. I started very early this morning by filling the still to the 3/4 mark, right about there. Then I boiled some water in that pan and added it to the still. And then I had to just put very hot water, tap water, another one of those, and that's what it took to cover the pomace. I had 5 bottles of apple wine that no one had been drinking, so I added that. We made apple wine and then apple brandy in 2021. So let's see what that adds to it. I had a couple of oranges that also nobody was eating, so I threw them in there as well. So we'll see how they affect the taste. It took about an hour for the temperature to go from 60 degrees to 150. So the dripping should begin pretty soon at about 175, 180. I'm using rainwater from this container, trying to be frugal and resourceful, and that's what is going to chill the still. The water enters the still through this tube, and I can control how much water with this valve. And the water comes out of the still from this tube right here. I try to keep the temperature in the 180s, and I can do that by controlling the water flow with that red valve. This drip is a little too fast. The temperature is holding steady at about 182, 184, and that's what I'm looking for. And that's when we get the little drip like this. Perfect. This brewhouse still came with 2 columns. I use 1 when I make grappa and 2 when I do a bourbon, but I haven't made bourbon yet, but the plan is to make it at some point. Then I put 2 rolls of copper mesh in the column, and that's brand new in the bag, and this has been used a few times. I clean it in white vinegar. 2 electric bands are enough to bring the pomace and water in there to a boil. I prefer the electric bands to fire because the fire can burn the bottom pomace. Then the steam goes through the copper mesh up the column. The steam is chilled by the water that's running through those hoses. And then once it's chilled, the grappa comes down this channel right there. We don't want the hoses that are taking the water out of the still to get too hot. So we can get them cooler by increasing the water flow. But we just have to play a game with the thermometer, because then when we increase the temperature, when we increase the water flow, the temperature comes down and the grappas might stop for a while. So it takes a little while to get the hang of this, but once you do it, you're there. The grappa drips down this hose here into the parrot. The grappa goes into the tube. The alcometer tells us the alcohol level, and that's the perfect drip right there. Wow. Let's go see what the temperature is. 181.7. Perfect. When the grappa was coming out about 68 to 55, you could taste some of that apple wine I put in there and those oranges. Now that it's down to 55, there's more of that nutty and licoricey flavor coming out. When the dripping goes too fast and the alcohol level drops, that's another sign that we need to make an adjustment. Increasing the water flow decreases the temperature. Temperature now is 180. And unfortunately, the grappa stops dripping. So now I'm going to have to start increasing the temperature to 190. You know, the machine has been running now for a few hours, so it's getting pretty hot in there. Every run is different because the mash that's in the kettle is always different. Today I'm using the pomace from the Carmenere grapes that came from Chile not that long ago. It tested in at 12.2% alcohol, and I pressed it when it had about 2% alcohol left. So there's not a lot of alcohol in this mash. We're getting down to the end. Now the machine is operating at about 199, almost 200. That's pretty hot. But the dripping is still good. It's not cloudy, and it doesn't have any burnt taste. I think I collected enough testa and cuore, and I'll start collecting la coda now. The tail, la coda, is starting to get a little cloudy. The taste is still good, so I'll collect a little bit more, but we're almost at the end of the run. The end is here. Alcohol is down to 10-15%. You have to keep the temperature above 200 to get anything to drip, so it's time to call it the end. We need the copper mesh in the column of the still for several reasons, but primarily to remove the sulfur compounds. So I just soak it overnight in vinegar, 5% distilled white vinegar, and that cleans it pretty well. Now I put the pomace underneath the backyard wine grape vines for two reasons. One, they smell great, and two, I've read many times that in vineyards around the world, doing so gets some of the yeast from the pomace up into the grapes on the vines. The last step, and in my opinion the most important one, is cleanup. So I disconnect all the tubes on the column and make sure they totally dry out, and use a brush if I have to clean them out. Make sure the still is completely clean, the kettle is completely clean. The vinegar did its job. It cleaned the copper mesh out very nicely. What a beautiful color. And then I just hang the copper mesh so it dries completely.